Since some of you are still getting used to the new terminology around the instincts, just making a quick note at the front that if you are used to the evolutionary terms for the instincts of sexual, self-preservational, and social, we are discussing terms that work better in our modern context and how we work. The hunter instinct pairs with the sexual instinct, the farmer instinct pairs with the self-preservational, and the teamer instinct pairs with the social. Let's jump in. Welcome to The Art of Growth. I'm Jim Zartman.
And I'm Joel Hubbard. We have a new book, Jim.
Yes,
it's called Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers. And in the opening story, I love sharing this story. I've done this with other teams. It's surprisingly affective. Immediately, I see facial expressions and responses. The story is this. This was during COVID, right? Or shortly after COVID?
Yeah, I think it was, first year of COVID.
Yeah. So we're on Zoom, and we're starting in with something we're doing together. We're working on a project, and it was you, me, and Susie. And right away, I have this idea because I'm hearing this conversation around this problem or this opportunity that we have, and immediately my mind goes into creative mode. It's impossible for me not to go there unless I'm completely disengaged.
Right.
And I'm thinking, oh, I just came up with an idea that could get us there faster, better, more enjoyably, whatever it is. Yeah. Generally, it's like, here's a better way we could get there. Or, here's a bigger thing that we could do that's beyond what we're looking at, the scope of what we're...
Yeah, you have like the possibility light bulb.
Yeah.
It's like, that's what is always going off in you. It's like the possibility light bulb.
Yeah. And I know that sometimes the idea is just like, well, it's probably not going to work, right? I always have that in the back of my mind, like, if I share this, is it going to get shot down? And how do I prepare myself to receive that?
So that's a learned thing, though?
For sure.
At a certain point in time, it was like, if I'm going to have a great idea, and it's always going to be amazing.
And it's always going to be amazing, and everybody should do it.
Everyone will love it.
And should get on board. And if you don't get on board, you're just being a butt, Yeah. And right. That was my belief for the longest time. So I share the idea, and immediately I see Susie's face, and I'm reading something, right? It's everything that we say about what we read is really our interpretation of what we read, not necessarily the impact it had on us. At an emotional level, at a sort of heart level, the impact is, oh no, she doesn't like it, right? There's like this feeling of, so then I think she's being resistant. She's not seeing it, right? It's like, I got to sell it more.
Well, and give a little more context. Like, there was a plan. Like, we had talked through and had come up with a plan. So we were on a trajectory at this point that it wasn't like this was a new idea we were at the beginning of brainstorming. There was an established
never come
direction
before. It always comes after the plan has already been established.
That it was like, we're on the railroad track, and it's like there's another set of tracks right there, and you're like pulling the lever.
Yeah, totally switching.
So, so understandable why the response was,
Okay, Mr. Teamer. Fair enough. But her expression is giving me this thing that she clearly did. So she follows it up with questions. She's really good at this. So she's like, so tell me, in a positive way too. She's not like, this can't work. It's more of like, so are we changing directions? Yeah. It was that kind of a question. And I'm thinking, I want to dismiss the question because I feel like it's, no, you're not understanding what I'm saying, right? And maybe I don't even understand what I'm saying at that point. It's sort of this intuition that functions at that level for a lot of hunters. It's like, I just have a sense and let's go there, right? And we'll figure it out. So I'm listening to the question. I'm trying to answer the questions, but I'm also feeling myself becoming reactive and wanting to sell more and convince more. Right. So this is more type specific than it is instinct specific.
Right.
But her questions are around sustainability and like, are we changing the plan? Which if we change the plan now, we've lost a lot of time.
Yeah. An effort that we've spent.
Correct. Which I don't calculate. That's not my instinct, right? So I don't calculate as much on the time and the cost as a farmer would. Farmers, they think about those things.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's about resource and it's about management of resource.
And she's an amazing one. Like, and
clearly,
I think like the kinds of questions that she was asking were very, I was like, I'm trying to be open because I want to be open if there's possibility here, but I'm also seeing that big picture of like what this cost could be. And I've seen, her do that in different situations because I think she's really wise, very mature about it because she doesn't want to miss something that's great, but it's also like a very understanding the reality. Like you can see someone in lots of different situations like this. You can see someone doing the math.
Oh, she's doing the math.
They're like, that's this many hours. We've done this. If we go back on this, that means we didn't utilize that resource well. So there's a calculation that's happening, and a calculation of like between now and working with this amazing opportunity that we had been given. This was one of our first really big corporate gigs. Multiple months, like huge for us too. And seeing what is going to happen down the road by the time we get there.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was observing. And I'm also going, okay, that I could see some potential here, and I don't want to miss potential either. But I'm feeling those calculations.
Yeah.
And I can feel the cost too.
Yeah. So you're able to see both, and you're seeing what's happening between the hunter and the farmer.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I'm getting resistance. She doesn't like the idea. Maybe I didn't present it correctly. All kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I go back and try a little bit more, trying to answer her questions. Later, we were able to laugh about it and realize what was happening. And she's like, oh, I'm not resistant. I wasn't resistant at all.
Right.
I was just thinking about everything that would go into it. So if we had not come back to that conversation, my interpretation of it would have still been, she's resistant. Right. And then you can make all sorts of stories around that. And typically people do. And then the next time we would have a meeting, I'd be a little bit more guarded and a little bit more defended. Right. And then she would too, maybe. And then we would show up, and this is going to turn the next meeting into a less effective, a less productive, a less positive, there would be less positive outcome from that meeting, because we're a little bit more guarded and protected. And I'm convinced that when we approach any session with people, whether it's in corporate or family systems, if we are in that guarded position, we are not capable of doing true connection, true relationship with family systems, and we're not able to get to good outcomes, good solutions, productivity in the high level of productivity, maybe activity, but not productivity, which is a big distinction in corporations. And so you don't end up bringing the best out of yourselves, and therefore you don't get a better outcome for the organization. And fortunately, we did talk about it, and we were able, it made so much sense to me, like, oh, you're seeing all of these things that I would have in the past discounted as unimportant. But because I'm doing this work of recognizing the three instincts and the need for them, we were able to come back and actually bring all three instincts together in a harmonizing way, not just a compromising way, in the sense in the sort of like...
Ooh, that's a really important distinction. Say that again.
So that's the difference between harmonization, I think, and compromise. I believe in compromise. It's a very important thing.
Yeah.
But if compromise is, I lose some, but I get something, and you lose something, and you get something, okay. But what if it's harmonization?
Yeah, that's the optimal.
What if it's all three get to play, and as a result, we all sound better, and we all perform better, right? And that's what we've discovered has been the alchemical result, let's say, of the three of us working together on projects. It's, oh, you know what? We can both preserve to some degree and have the sustainability because we're introducing something that will produce some change, yes, but it will get us to our destination. And if we're paying attention to the costs, then it'll be reduced loss of costs, reduced loss of resources, and this big, huge gain. And how do we do this? Well, we do this in a certain process that will work for all of us.
Yeah.
And it just is so... It's surprising how good the result is, because you don't think of it at the beginning. You think of it in terms of what you're losing if you don't get, your instinct doesn't get to do its thing completely.
Yeah.
But you actually gain so much that your instinct then is satisfied and somewhat happy as a result of that.
In that moment too, being strong in the teamer instinct myself, I'm also trying to picture it with the client. So I'm trying to picture your idea being presented to the client, imagining how they are receiving it, but I'm also imagining the process of how to get there. And I don't know if this is part of the teamer instinct, because I always, think about that the process is just as important to me as the result. Like how we get there together matters just as much to me as the destination
and
that
the
we get
process
to.
being the relational process or the social process.
The whole process, even the making, like the creating of something, like the generative aspect of creating something together, of doing something together. How do we feel when we're doing it together for these other people? How do they feel receiving it from us? Because I actually love every aspect of the construction of something. Like we were talking a little bit in last week's episode about how you and I wrote the book together. I love the different aspects that go into creating something together, generating ideas, leaving Marco Polos and like, here, I have this idea and maybe this section could do something like this, or can we go into this story? I love that. So it is the journey for me and the destination. It is absolutely both. And so I'm always running things through that lens. And I think what this opening story shows is, one, we all have a bias, right? So we talk about this a lot throughout the book. I love your line that, well, it's not just your line, but the old saying that to someone with a hammer, every problem is a nail.
Yeah.
That tends to be how our instincts work. We tend to think through our lens. And so when it comes to having to present to a client that's, this is a big opportunity for us at the time, it was nothing like it. I'm thinking, well, we all have to work together well. We're talking about how to work with teams and all this stuff. And if we don't work together well, then it won't work well there.
Yeah.
And you're thinking about like, well, there's this idea and we could do this. And I want them to have this experience. You're seeing something that's potential. And Susie was seeing like all of the steps and the processes we need to take in order for that to be a success.
Yeah.
And so all of us are right equally. And we've seen this on teams. We've worked with teams where we can see their gifts and we meet with them and we're like, oh my goodness, they're so amazing. Every person on that team, like incredible. Like we do one-on-ones, in typing interviews or whatever with the team. And we kind of fall in love with all of them.
Mm-hmm.
They're all amazing.
Yeah.
And then we come together and we realize that they're not getting along. They're not appreciating each other's contributions that much. And I go, when I think of stories like this, I can see how any team could get there if they don't understand the value that each person is bringing, which is a huge part of why we wrote this book. And that's kind of the thing, a theme throughout the whole thing is how people can equally bring what they offer together, because all of it is an amazing gift.
Well, and there's a way to do this, and I don't know how far we want to go down this path, but we're not talking about a mashing together of different instincts so that we end up with a blandness and a sort of weak compromise of like, well, yeah, we're all just harmony, love, peace, all of the non-conflict, consensus kind of stuff. That's not what we mean if that comes across in any way, that's the goal of this is like, because there are plenty of teams that we deal with that are non-confrontational. They're avoidant teams.
Yeah.
And it creates all sorts of other problems.
Yeah.
And that's why they sometimes bring us in. I just did a team session for a group that is that way. High agreeableness, low confrontation. So they're having problems. So I'm dealing with that. Well, that's not a solution.
Right.
And yet they totally would say, oh, we value everybody. It's one of their value statements is everybody's gifts, everybody's talents, everybody's contribution, highly inclusive, right? So big pushers of that. Well, that's great. But unless you have something to conflict around, you're not bringing your whole self to the table, and therefore you're not going to get the best.
Yeah.
You're going to get a weak middle. Because again, you and I, when we worked together and with Susie, we had the bumping up against. You said, for you, your teamers like, how can we all equally? Well, that's not my starting point as a hunter. My starting point isn't, because I have teamers my second, I can move there quickly to like, no, I want everybody to win. But the hunter in me still wants me to win more so. My idea is better. Let's go with my idea. That kind of thing. It's still there. It doesn't go away. And for most hunters, if they're honest with themselves, they're saying that's true. There's an aspect of them that's still very much there, of wanting to win, the competition, right? It's very much that. So bring that to the table, and bring that to the table with awareness and with some levity and humor. Bring it with some humor. Like, for sure, I think my idea is the best.
Yeah.
I'm putting it out there. However, now I'm open as a result to getting pushback, right? So I position myself to, and this is critical, this is hugely important, position yourself to be potentially wrong, to being shown that you're not entirely right about what you think, or that your approach isn't the best approach, or that you are probably missing something significant. If you position yourself that way, not as a soft approach, but like, oh, I'm convinced. My instinct is convinced this is the best thing.
Yeah.
But I probably am wrong about that. So let's talk. Well, if you do this pushing back and forth, which shouldn't be intense, shouldn't be, people getting angry at each other and yelling at each other. It doesn't need all that. But it can still show up as firm, strong discussion, debate even, to then get to, oh, that's the better solution right there. And I think that's a strong harmony rather than a weak harmony as a result of that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've both been in teams that I've worked on. I've both been the highly confrontational person as a type 8, and I've been very much the low confrontation, not saying things as the teamer. And sometimes I would feel this push and pull between those two things. And I think in all of them, I would have said that I highly value everyone's contribution, that like everyone has a role to play. When I'm in that non-confrontational, a collective space of wanting, I would believe that. But until I went through the instincts and realized how low my farmer was, a lot of it was lip service.
Sure.
A lot of it was, yes, we value everything. And there's a place for that. And it's over here. And I didn't have the value I have now of actually all three of these are equally valuable. I felt so exposed when I first learned about the instincts, when I saw how low that farmer instinct was in me, that preservational instinct. My first reaction was like, well, that should be lowest.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
That was my first reaction.
Well, let's be fully, it's important to be honest like this.
Well, yeah, I'm being fully honest. And that was my first reaction. But the more I dug into it, I realized there's so many, I've seen the cost of that attitude. I've seen what it has cost me over a lifetime to not be as invested in that as I should.
Yeah.
In so many areas of my life, that if I would have been more aware of that, if I had developed at least a baseline competency in my lowest instinct, that a lot of problems that arose in my life would not have arose.
Well, we say that it actually prevents you from your dominant instinct being at the highest and most effective it could be. And that's what we've discovered. It's like, oh my gosh, it has sabotaged my capacity, my competencies in many regards. No, but I think it's important for you to be honest, because there's so many people that feign honesty. So it's like, we value this, we value that, right? But you read the book and you're like, well, clearly you still think that yours is better. Like, and I've read these books and I'm like, oh, come on. Like, I read one book, it was on types. It's a very popular book on types. And I'm like, obviously you are infatuated with the 7. Like, it's so obvious. And I'm a 7. And so I don't mind you being infatuated with the 7. That's kind of like ego stroking, but it disgusted me because it was like, wait, this is gross. Like, you clearly favor the 7 over the other types.
Yeah.
Based on how you wrote about them. Now, I had some students I think it was our January session. I had some students who were like working with me through language around types and instincts, the combination of both. And one of them was like, well, so Joel, you've got this seems more negative on these types here. And on these other ones, you seem more positive. And I looked at them.
Called out.
And I was like, damn, she's right.
Yes. That's
like,
so
she
good.
exposed
Love being
me.
called out. Yeah,
like, it was
so good.
It was so good. And it opened up an area of, I still have some stuff around certain types that affected me in a certain way.
Well,
and then
we all have that
through.
When we've had maybe even a recent interaction.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The recent interactions with color.
So I think a lot of people have had that where they have someone that's either very close to them or that they've had a very recent struggle with, and they think, I have a problem with it. And then if they're writing about types or they're writing about instincts, that comes out. That bias really does come out.
Yeah.
And we are always having to check our bias.
Oh, man, yeah.
It's always a thing where I'm like, I think this one line is not quite as favorable. It doesn't really paint them in the right light. We're not showing the high side of that thing.
That's right.
And so, I mean, in writing this book, I was like ruthless about that. I was constantly checking that, checking
Well, it was
myself.
great to get feedback from your wife, Abby, who said that she didn't feel like it was that we had biased any of the instincts. That
was a huge thing when she said that. I was so relieved because I had been so vigilant about that throughout as we were writing it. Because, she said that it had bothered her when she had seen it in other spaces where people are like, they're writing about all three instincts, but they definitely favor or tend to think this one is better.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't like that either. Because my starting point has to believe when it comes to types that it is not better to be any one type than another. My starting point with instincts is that it is not better to have one than the other. It is the harmonizing that is the benefit.
Yeah. So the other opposite extreme is I've read authors who, because they've overcompensated, so they're glorifying a particular type too much. Yeah. It's like you either are in love with this type or you're compensating because you have a problem with that type and you don't want it to come through. So you're bullshitting now.
Well, I would never have thought of that.
I've done it. I've done it myself. I haven't done so that's big. Yeah, you haven't done it, but I've done it,
man. I don't like you.
Yeah. I know. You're typical 8. It's like I'm definitely not gonna do that.
So why I think I'm more aware of that because I've seen it in myself and go, I don't. That's a part of me I do not want to keep.
That. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah,
I get you. So that's the part I think it's okay for you to come at the instinct with a bias. It's important for you to name it.
Yeah.
And to be like, I clearly think the hunter's the best. Absolutely. But then, once I say it, I admit it, it's acknowledging it. Yeah. It's not making a statement that's a factual statement. It's acknowledging what you actually believe underneath things.
Yeah. I'm going to make a bias statement.
Yeah.
And this is what it is.
Yeah. And then you can move past it. Yeah. Then you can go, okay, now let me look with openness now. Yeah. At the other instincts, which has helped me enormously to get to the place where I don't see it as the hunter. I prefer, there's a difference. I prefer the hunter instinct, and you should prefer your dominant instinct.
You should, yeah.
Because I think that's your light. That's part of your light to shine in the world. So you should love it.
But I'm guessing other people, when they hear you say that, they have this little discomfort like I do hearing that statement because I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, and they should. Yeah. They should have that little, you just say your instinct is your preference and that's good. And you should live with that. That is a natural reaction to have.
Yeah. And it's helped me to then start to know the other instincts and to love them, to see their amazing depth and richness and gifting for the world, that now I look at it and at times envy it, at times in a good way, not like, I feel that it's like, oh man, I'd love to be able to do that. I'd love to have that. And it's a depth and a richness that I don't possess. I think people work too hard against their bias to not be biased. It's like, stop. You are. Like good. Admit it. Just acknowledge it, and then you can move past it. That's the way you move past it, right? So it's one of the first principles I learned through the narrative tradition was the term that they used was acceptance, and they had to really work at defining it because a lot of people hated that word. It was like, it's not acceptance as an acquiescence. It's like acknowledge.
Yeah.
Acknowledge what is without trying to fight it. And that helps to relax. Is what, I stole that from Helen Palmer, who's my teacher. Phenomenal, brilliant mind. And just the depth and wisdom was rich. But she would always say, like, relax. It's helping you to relax the type, the fixation, the stricture, the tension that the type holds on to itself so hard. It's like, relax that, right? When you relax that, suddenly it's not a thing as much as it was before. It's not that it went away, but it's not driving the whole show. So now you can include other things. And so that's all we're saying is like, acknowledge that you have a preference, acknowledge that you value your instinct. And even those of you who have started to hate your instinct, because we've coached people who hate their dominant instinct because it's not valued in their circles.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Or even within themselves and their family structure.
Absolutely.
It's like really hard. Yeah.
And what we want to do is to help you to reclaim it and to love it.
Freaking celebrate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The more I got to know the thing that I was weakest in, I did have a little bit of that the beautiful jealousy of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also just the value of it goes up. I can be in awe of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when you're at your best, actually, is when you're in awe of what you don't have.
Yeah.
And you're celebrating it and welcoming it.
Perfect. Yes.
As opposed to defending it. But I think this is something that when we are really stressed out, this is when it becomes the most dangerous, that we hyper-focus on our own solutions.
Yes.
And the blinders go on. It's like, no, there's trouble now. So I don't have this openness of welcoming all of the different contributions.
Oh, you named something huge.
Like,
that's a good awareness. It's like, how am I doing right now? Am I stressed? Do I feel protective in this environment? If I do, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to over-leverage my instinct.
Yeah.
When I show up to this meeting, when I come home and hang out with my family, it's the instinct that's going to kick on and fire before even type will. And that is so important to be aware of, because if you don't know that, you're going to keep showing up at your meetings and you think everybody else is the problem. When it's like, well, you're part of that system and you're part of creating that because you're in that protective, defended space. So that's why we say you got to deal with stuff that is turning into. I had a coaching session last night with somebody, and kind of an informal one, and I said, you know, think about your conflict avoidance. So think about, like, is this, you're not going to deal with every conflict because that's dumb, right? You just don't do that. But what conflict do you know, if you think about it, do you know will show up? If you don't deal with it, it will continue to live inside you for weeks. Yeah. And you know the answer to that question. And it was funny because he instantly said, you know, this funny thing about it, Joel? I've been practicing that. Before you even said that, I started doing that. And I know the answers to these questions. It's like, oh, of course you do.
That's great.
Of course you do. Good. It's just bringing awareness to some of them you're not entirely sure about, but some of them you know for sure. If I don't address this, it's going to live with me for the next few weeks. And if it does live with you, guess how you're going to show up?
Yeah, this is one of these things that I think even writing the book enhanced for me is the valuing of all three. Because writing about them in a really beautiful way, celebrating all of them, celebrating when I welcome back the true instinct that I'm deepest in, that I'm dominant in a beautiful way, and when I can welcome and develop a little bit of that competency in my lowest one and really celebrate it in others and be so thankful. And like, that's what happens now. It's like gratitude that this person has this gift that I tend to struggle with.
Yeah.
That you thrive in what I struggle in, and I thrive in what you struggle in. Oh my goodness, now what can we do together?
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's what it feels like. Now we're onto something.
Yeah.
And that feels powerful. And that is the opposite of what it used to be for me, which was defensive, or it was difficult to accept that, or I saw it as not a positive thing, slowing me down, as getting in my way, as like, oh, there's too much detail. Like that was my attitude with that. And to shift into that welcome is, it's even functionally, emotionally stabilizing.
Isn't it? It's funny how that works.
Yes.
It is true. It's very much like that. One of my teachers used to say it's the three-legged stool. If you have all three, you're balanced, and you feel that underneath you. But when you're functioning on only two, what happens? You're wobbly in life. That's a very good metaphor, because that is how it feels.
Yeah, but if three people are all missing a leg, but they put their stools together, they'll kind of be balanced.
Absolutely.
And so that's what we're advocating for in this book. That's what we're going to be advocating for as we talk through the instincts and meaningful work over the next several weeks here.
So thanks for listening. You can take the new Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers assessment on our website, theartofgrowth.org. That is our new instincts test. And you can order the Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers book on Amazon now. The link is in the show notes. Based on our interactions, we are also adding content to our Instagram about the topic, which is just Art of Growth. And the best way to support the show is to leave us a review wherever you listen and share this episode with someone else. We're hugely grateful for you doing this work with us. Grace and growth, my friends.